Why have I quit my job? Why have I, bought a van? And why am I going to drive around the country? Well, I'm passionate about the idea that you need to be heard. And I want to stitch these stories together across the states. We're going to find the commonalities, and it's going to be really an amazing experience, and I look forward to you joining me on the jar. Hey everybody, welcome back to Mental Health Today. I am your host, Ken Stearns. Really good to be back on the mental health microphone, because I always have guests that really enlighten me. This is, I do the retail podcast, which is Show the Jar, and the common thread that I found was mental health, a crisis in mental health, and taking that thread, starting this show. And it's just been really interesting for me, very educational. And I hope anybody listening, kind of following along, gets this out of it as well, which is just the different ways that people are approaching helping solve the crisis. And it's fascinating to me because I'm an experimenter by nature. I love experimenting, and there are always more than one way to skin this cat. And I think Lindsay, I think you're a great next guest in a series of so many, kind of painting this fabric of how do you solve a mental health crisis. And it takes a lot of people and a lot of different approaches. And I like how some of the stuff that I saw on your site and the testimonials about saying how this method, or some of the methods you're using, really do feel like they're getting progress. I thought that was a powerful testimonial from that one gentleman on the YouTube, really getting back to nature and, being a veteran. And I also thought your veteran work is really good. But before we get kind of in all that, how did you end up in mental health? How did you end up start off as a therapist? And how does that happen? Was it mom's idea?
Absolutely did not start off. So first, thank you for even giving me a platform to tell this story, because it is long and strange and interesting, but I feel like life was always kind of leading me here. So
yes, you're right where you're supposed to be.
Yeah. I will tell you that the underlying thread throughout my entire life, and then into my entire professional life, has always been nature. It's this very deep connection to nature that I've always had as my caretaker, my safe space. And from the time that I was very young, I grew up in a household with two very loving parents. But, my father was a Vietnam veteran. He did 2 tours in the Navy during Vietnam.
Okay.
My computer's being finicky with me. Did 2 tours in the Navy during Vietnam, and like most Vietnam vets, came home just as the war was ending, and carried a lot of baggage with him. So I put this neatly by saying that my mother and I were often collateral damage to that. And despite the fact that I grew up in the city of Rochester, with my neighborhood kind of being bordered by 2 different major thoroughfares, I was able to find some really beautiful green space. If I hopped the fence from my backyard, went down to the dead end at the end of my street, and then into the woods back there. And as it turns out, those woods would dump out into the shoreline of the Irondequoit Bay. So here in Rochester, New York, I was outside as often as humanly possible. And of course, back in the 80s, you didn't have to come inside until you heard like the dinner whistle,
Yes.
My mother had a fantastic whistle where she would use like both fingers in her mouth. I can't do that. But I could hear her from miles away. And so I'd hear the dinner whistle and then come running back. And again, in the 80s, you could do that, right? So
absolutely.
Nature was she was my safe space when things didn't feel quite safe at home. And I always had an affinity for green spaces. I was never afraid to be in the woods by myself, despite the fact that I grew up in the city, and was always adventuring and exploring and just doing those types of things. So naturally, when things led into high school, I remember at a career fair, a woman asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I told her I wanted to save the world. And she laughed at me, and I was very serious. And I said, I'm not kidding. That is what I want to do. So not knowing any better, I think she kind of steered me towards environmental science. And I got my undergraduate and my graduate degree in environmental science. A lot of it had to do with conservation work and just understanding how people interacted with natural spaces, and what that looked like in different degrees of management, federal, state, private, nonprofit, so on and so forth. And the conclusion that I felt was most important in all of that was, when you try to protect it by putting up a fence around it, it is much more likely for that area to remain unprotected because you haven't included local culture and people and ancestry there in that process of protection. But in the green spaces that were protected, and that protection plan included education, volunteer, and engagement with the people living around those spaces, not only was it more financially efficient, but it was just more efficient and effective all the way around. So there was something to people connected with their green space. Anyway, I managed to get the National Science Foundation to give me a fellowship to complete all that research. And they, in the process, the exchange was that I could spend my semesters living in Puerto Rico and working with the people in Puerto Rico, but I had to come back for one semester to finish classes. And while I was doing that, I also had to teach a course to high school seniors called The Global Environment.
Okay. That sounds like a pretty good exchange.
It was. And I'm happy that I did it because, as it turns out, I didn't really want anything to do with science research. I wanted to teach, and I didn't know it. Yeah. So my first kind of taste for that was I got a scholarship and I went over to the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in 2009. And the more that I interacted and talked with people, the more I realized how much I love to talk about this. And then my master's rolled around, and I realized how much I really love educating young people about this. And I started to see the effects of what was happening, and they were doing research projects, and they were going out into the world and like asking hard questions of politicians and company owners and completing this research. And it was great. And so I thought, that's it. I'm going to be an educator. That's going to be my career. And I did that for a good long time. I traveled. I worked in California. I came back here to New York. My husband and I started a nonprofit organization called the Earthworks Institute here in Rochester. Based in expeditionary learning. We worked mostly, we either did forest school programs. We were the first forest school in Rochester, or we did education. I was an adjunct professor with my former college, ESF, SUNY ESF, and we did education in city classrooms, expeditionary learning, where we would bring kids outside into nature, and I loved it.
Oh, that's magic. I mean, kids, real city kids into real, take your shoes off, feel the grass.
Yes. Don't have to stand in line. You don't have to be quiet. No, there aren't bears and wolves out here. Just, we were right in the city of Rochester, just using city green spaces, but really, really creating these incredible experiences for young people here in Rochester who didn't think that they either should or could have access to it. And Ken, I would have done this forever. Unfortunately, right around, actually, it was the beginning of 2017, my father was diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer. And it put my whole world on hold. And a lot came up for me during that year with him. There's a lot from childhood, like I mentioned before.
Yeah, there's a lot to process there.
Yeah. And the cancer came on so quickly that there's a lot that didn't wind up getting processed because after a while, there just wasn't the capacity. And so I had to go through a journey of my own, trying to figure out how to love and forgive and care and just, I don't know, reconcile with all of it. And it was a tough, 2018 was a rough year. 2017 was rough, just caring for him. And then after we lost him, spent a lot of 2018 just trying to figure it all out. One of the thoughts that kept coming into my head over and over again is, for 15 years, my father went to a mental health counselor at the VA, and nothing was resolved for him. And there was a
Wow.
lot, both personally and between him and I, that just never got talked about and never got resolved. And
Mm.
I kept also reflecting back to right up until the day he passed, how important it was for him to just be able to sit quietly and look at green spaces, look at natural spaces, and how he instilled that in me. And I thought to
Mm.
myself, there's something more to this outdoor thing,
Yeah.
you know? And I want to make that happen somehow. And so what I did was I took that life experience and my background as a research scientist, and I started doing some research into nature-based therapy and what that looked like, and especially for veterans. And I
Yeah.
realized that there's all kinds of programs all over the country that
Yes.
have to do with wilderness therapy, meaning you pluck somebody out of their environment, you put them into a wilderness environment, and then they spend any number of weeks to months out there, and then they're supposedly supposed to be rehabilitated and then put right back into their
Oh,
regular environment again.
oh goodness. Yeah.
And there's
That,
a lot to be said for that. I know plenty of wilderness therapists that do really good work, but I also know plenty of wilderness therapists who have been doing research into how effective is this. And one
okay.
of those individuals was Dr. Nevin Harper, and he's a Canadian. He hails from the West Coast, kind of Vancouver area in Canada, and he teaches for um, Vancouver University, I believe, or University of Vancouver. And him and I had a long conversation one evening after I listened to a similar podcast that he was doing. And he basically explained that while wilderness therapy does have effectiveness, there's a lot that hasn't been studied with that in terms of long-term effectiveness. And I said to him, I think I can do it differently. I think that there's a way to
Mm.
make this happen on a local scale in a way that it integrates therapy into everyday life, so that people who go through this process understand not only how important their connection is to themselves and something greater, whether that's the natural world or whatever you're connected with, but also that there is a way to make this an integrated part of life. Meaning, I wanted people to understand that after a while, the therapy is great, but you can still go outside into a
Yeah.
park
Yes.
and
Yeah.
get that same experience. You can still plan a trip, if you're here in Rochester, to the Adirondacks or to the Catskills or to the Finger Lakes, or we have all this green space, this beautiful treasury of green space that we are surrounded by, and you don't need a therapist to go use it. It
Mm.
helps if you add that, right? But
Yes.
nature is a blessing in and of itself, and that it does most of the work for us to make us feel healthier if we just allow that to happen. So anyway, 2020 rolls around. COVID, I get this first initial kind of pilot business up and running, Tribe, and then COVID hits in March, and I have all the time in the world. So what am I going to do with my time? I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get a second master's degree in because why not torture myself after 12 years being out of school?
And being a teacher. So now
And
you're
being a
back to being a
teacher.
student. Now you're
Hmm.
back on the other. Oh boy.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting watching other people teach who
Yeah, I'm
who have
sure.
knowledge of the content, but don't necessarily have an affinity for teaching.
Yes, you can feel it.
Yeah, so I went back to school and I got my second degree, my second master's degree in mental health counseling, and here I am um, I'm still technically pre-licensed, which means that like
Okay.
a doctor, I would be in residency. So I'm kind of in a
Mm.
residency period right now. I have
Okay.
about 1,500 more hours to complete. But in the process between 2020 and let's say May of this year, roughly, um, I've garnered some funding from private, nonprofit, and public agencies, government agencies. I was one of the first people to ever receive government funding to run an ecotherapy program for veterans. And in
Wow.
that pilot, did some really great work. We had an epidemiologist study our work. So a lot of the data that you're seeing on my website is pulled directly from work that we did with
Okay.
veterans. And and that was amazing, and I loved it. And now I am in just working in private practice, kind of doing my own thing. It's a little less stressful than
Yes.
managing an organization, if you will, with a big project and lots of pressure to match funding. I'm just kind of working with individuals and enjoying every minute of it, and knowing that it's effective and it's great and I love it, and I wish more people would do this. Yeah.
Yeah. So now in your practice, you're using nature and the skills you've got, the technical skills, the kind of traditional therapy skills.
Yeah. So the skills are
Interesting.
mixed. I have
Yeah.
the science education, I have the educator education, which is great because I usually function through something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a lot of psychoeducation. It's helping people
Yep.
understand just how the mind works.
What's
To,
happening? Yeah.
yeah, to normalize it so people don't feel like they're so isolated or alone or whatever crazy. Um, and then I take that and combine it with the mental health work, which is great because, they told us to memorize the DSM-5 and learn all of the um, diagnoses and treatment and all that, which is wonderful. But this other piece that I really love is um, not only am I an 8-year veteran for practicing wilderness first response. So like I'm a wilderness first
Yeah. I saw
responder,
that.
which
I
means that
saw
I'm
that.
I'm a wilderness medic. I can treat people in the wilderness to the extent of my credential. Um, but I also have at this point, trying to think, 15 years of practice as a wilderness survival specialist. So I love bringing people outside, number one, because I get to practice my skills, but number two,
Yeah.
because I get to help people understand what nature looks like, not only as a part of them, but really specifically food, medicine, utility, all of those things that help us on a biological level just be a
Hmm.
part of the natural world. So I can talk all about the science, but I'm also really good at talking all about the hard skills. And I love teaching that stuff. It's fun.
I mean, I imagine that's what a great diversion for bad self-talk and everything else, right? To go start a fire.
You remember Tom Hanks in what was
Yeah.
that movie where he talked to Wilson all the time?
Oh
Castaway.
yeah. Yeah.
Remember
Castaway.
when he started that fire with his bare hands?
Yeah.
I highly recommend anybody who's listening to go back and watch that scene again. Just pull it up on YouTube and imagine if you could start fire with your bare hands, you might never be afraid to try something new ever again. You
Yeah.
know, imagine what that does in a therapy setting.
Yeah. You reminded me of an interview. One of the earliest people I had on was with a company called Chimney Trail.
Oh, okay.
And they really interesting story. It was a great episode. Two gentlemen that came together really over a friend's suicide.
Mm-hmm.
One of their friends' suicide, and he was a captain of a ship, and he was a fast track, could have been Western, the Western Fleet commander
Yeah.
kind of caliber,
Yeah.
and took his own life. And that ended up, these two gentlemen got together and started a chimney trail. And the idea there is they use like boxes and games or activities
Yeah.
that are CBT based.
Okay.
And it's kind of do it yourself. You open up the box and it's an activity for like five, or maybe it's two. I can't remember if it's one person or two people, but it could be like four people sit around and you do the activity together. And I think a couple of them, one of them was like start a fire.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, it's just these kinds of really kind of interesting. And there's a series of boxes, of course, or series of activities in which they come in a box.
Yeah.
And it's a practical skill to teach you the CBT techniques.
Right. So it sounds like also very engaging, right? Like physical, tactile engagement
Yeah,
in this process of thinking through mental health. Yeah.
yeah,
Great.
yeah. It's very
Yeah.
tactile. And so you don't feel like you're getting a therapist walking you through something, you're being shown how to do it, I
Sure.
guess. Um, yeah, just was just thinking. So when you were mentioning that, I'm like, oh, you should find those guys, because that's, if you go out and you're out in the wilderness and using CBT, this is a really interesting company as well.
Sure it is. Yeah. Chimney Trail.
Chimney Trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Chimney Trail Health. and preventative self-led mental health in a box.
Great.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, fun stuff. And
Yeah.
they're working. Obviously, they're also really trying hard with veterans.
Okay, that's good to know also.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
veterans are one of my favorite groups of people to work with. They're also one of the most difficult groups of people to work with because of
Mm,
um, what has happened as a result of, exposure to military culture, which is very much like, we don't talk about it. You just shut up and move on, right? And it's not like all of a sudden once
mm.
vets are discharged, then that just kind of goes away. It's a piece of them that they bring with them. And it takes a long time to understand that that's not necessarily the healthiest way to live the rest of your life. That might have served you while you were there trying to complete a mission, but it's not the way to live a healthy lifetime. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an analogy for so many people's journey in mental health, right? They're trying, even like you growing up, right? You got to
Hmm.
complete the mission because you can see, you got to get through this till I'm
Yeah.
18,
Yes.
until I can, go to school or whatever that chance is when you're going to have a little bit of safe, where you can control your environment.
Yes.
And, it's I think but
Yeah.
just kind of parking everything that's happening to you, compartmentalizing it
Yeah.
and knowing there's another place. But when you get to that new place, how do you unpack that little suitcase you've got?
Right. And where are the tools that you use to unpack
And
it? And that's the work, is learning the tools, because it's that old adage, right? Teach a person to fish and they'll be able to, they'll never go
yeah,
hungry for the rest of their lives. And that's what we want, is for them to not be dependent on the therapist, but for them to slowly feel empowered to help themselves by just building up a skill set.
yeah, I think that for me is one of the the things I'd love to see happen in the
Hmm.
space more is people getting away from the endless, at least the same kind of therapy, right? Not never changing and always like your dad, right? 15 years of going to see the same person or maybe two or three people, but the
Yeah.
same style, same format, similar setting.
40
Yeah,
minutes at a time.
if you're not, yeah, I mean, exactly. And I mean, it would be like me going to my trumpet class when I hadn't practiced,
Yeah.
right? It'd be
Yeah.
like,
That's a really good.
let's make the warm up last as long as we can. Let's see if we can have a couple of side discussions. We'll spend about 10 minutes on the lesson I didn't really practice, and then we can talk about next week.
Yeah,
Like how fast can I get out of here?
exactly.
Uh, and how can I reduce the real conversation to the shortest amount of time?
Hmm. And that's the problem too, is that a lot of these big facilities, and I'm not knocking big facility, or rather, I'm not knocking the staff in the facilities, because they're doing the best they can working within the guidelines that have been set forth,
Yep.
right? But unfortunately, the guidelines are all about productivity. I did a short stint for an internship
Mm,
after I got out of college, and I'm not going to name the company, but I can tell you that it's here in New York, and they are very, very much focused on productivity, meaning they want to see how many for one therapist, how many clients they can get through in one day. And some therapists have up to 100 clients that they're seeing, and some of these clients aren't even really getting the care. Sometimes they don't show up, or sometimes they'll show up and they'll just talk about, whatever that therapist happens to be wearing for the day, or they're wearing for the day, or a fashion style, but the treatment really isn't happening. And these therapists feel like they're under
mm.
the gun almost to, treat this whole process like a Burger King drive-through. Like, okay, tell me your order. What do you need? Okay, you're out next. Tell me your order. What do you need? Okay, you're out next. And
It's
that's not real therapy. And as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's doing more damage to some extent, because, if you've gone to therapy, let's say for
mm.
2 years, and this is the way that you're receiving treatment, you're more apt to think that you're the problem, when in fact it's the way the treatment's being handled.
That would be the worst outcome.
Yeah.
The worst outcome would be that it's you.
Yeah, if nothing's working, therapy doesn't work, I'm
Right.
damaged, I'm broken. And I can tell you that I have heard that not just where I did my internship, but
Mm.
also when I received veteran clients in from the VA. I cannot tell you
Yeah, I'm
how
sure.
many times
It's
in intake I would hear them say, like, I think I'm broken. I just don't think that I can be fixed. It's like, I'm not sure that that's the case. I think it's just the system you were working within, honestly.
Yeah, I feel for therapists right now in those, there's going to be, I mean, there'll be a lot of smaller practices where it's run by one therapist, and it's a team of, I've met some of these where it's 4 or 5 ladies together, versus a big investment company buying up 10 practices.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be all about the metrics,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're going to want to very quickly. And if they do, I mean, this is a scary part. I kind of know how this works. If the metrics work out, then they'll buy more practices, and this will just continue, right? The franchises will grow, and they'll swallow up, every 45-year-old person who has a book of business is going to get swallowed up, and this will be what's applied. And then they'll do the licensing, and then they'll get the legislation. I mean, the good news is, at least if the investment firms do come into the space, they will convince Congress through some political donations to at least fix the licensing state by state.
Yeah, I guess so. I
I'd be willing to bet anybody $1,000 that the licensing will be fixed, and this will be the reason. Because investment companies can only do this really well if they can get one light right, and you get across state lines, right?
Yeah.
And that will solve so much of the challenges.
Yeah. So we're hopeful for that, right? At least that might come out of it.
Yeah, it's a good outcome, but the metrics worry me. If they're very focused on number of patients, they're trying to establish the ROI, right? What are the metrics? What do I need to? What are the numbers I need to get when I go into to buy somebody, and how to make an offer on a practice,
and how to keep that funding rolling? Because a lot of times, if you have a government funded agency or a state, state or federal funded agency, the only thing that matters is how much money are we putting in and how many people are being seen. They're not worried about the quality of the care. They're worried about how many patients are coming through the system in a day or a week or a month. And that just keeps increasing.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, that's a part. I mean, can we measure care? Is that something how do you measure care? Because that should be.
You just look at outcomes, right? You look at treatment outcomes. The same thing that we used to do with our program when we ran the veteran program. You bring people in, you give them a baseline. So we would give them a PCL5 looking for depression, or looking for PTSD symptoms, or a PHQ-9 looking for depression, or a mindfulness questionnaire looking for like emotional regulation. Then on day 1, we would assess them again. And that would sometimes only be 2 days later, just again, to make sure that the baseline matches.
Just to match it up.
6 weeks through the program, we would test them again to see where they were at. And then on the final day of graduation, we would test them again. So we would test them 4 times in 12 weeks or 3 months. And that's, it's simple metrics, but the metrics are there to show that the work is actually happening and it's having a really good success rate. It doesn't take a lot just to know if your client is actually feeling the positive effects of the treatment that you're applying.
I mean, unless you have 100 clients.
Exactly. You said it.
I mean, holy cow.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That would be a lot of clients.
I can't even imagine having 100 clients that I had to be responsible for.
That's 5 a day, right? 5 a day.
Yep, that's right. More or less 5 a day.
20 days in a month.
And some of those clients you don't necessarily see every single week. You might see them twice a month or something like that.
That's only, I'm just thinking once, that's enough for 100 appointments. That's once a month. That's not even, oh my God. I don't know really how we turn around some of this machinery before it kind of goes off the cliff, but it definitely seems like the investment side is coming in, and we'll see a lot of acquisition. A lot of the metrics will come with it.
I'm trying to keep holding out hope for the little folks like myself and others that I know that are in this type of practice, who know that maybe some of the bigger government regulations need to happen and some of the standardized
Yes.
stuff needs to fall into place. But at the same time, I will be honest and say that when I got into this field to treat people, um, it was more because I saw that the larger system didn't work and I wanted
Hmm.
to try something different. And I'm appreciative of the fact that there are more and more of us out there that want to
Yes.
try music therapy, art therapy,
Yes.
movement therapy, nature based therapy. And a lot of that has to do with the complexity of human beings. We are these
Mm.
complex, beautiful creatures that have positive and negative experiences. And what we are dealing with right now is, and this is my personal opinion, so you can't go find
Yeah.
science on this. This is just me, Lindsay,
Okay.
speaking. And I always like to underscore like when I'm stating from fact and where you can cite that from and where I'm just talking from, out of my own head. But what I am seeing from where I stand is this renaissance of awakening for the way that we not only view mental health as a culture, but also the way that we
Yeah.
treat mental health as a culture. Um, my parents, my father passed at 65, my mother is 78, and bless her heart, I hope I'm like her when I'm 78 because she's got all kinds of energy. But her and most of the people in her era, and even those who are a little bit younger than her, who, my father, like the Vietnam
Hmm.
era, um, even the talk of therapy is taboo. So you
Yes.
have lots of folks who are in this era where they grew up, where it's like we don't go to get our head shrunk. There's nothing wrong with us. We're
Mm.
not, defective. We don't need a therapist. Therapists are only for people who are crazy. And in fact, I will always want to be able to put this other narrative out there, which is it takes a village. It takes a village to keep human beings whole, to live together, to thrive.
Mm.
And we have we were in this very long phase of like independence and isolation, meaning like we can do it on our own. We don't talk about our problems with other people.
Yeah.
We don't broadcast our family issues. Everything just stays internal, and or we don't talk about that because it's not okay and it makes us feel uncomfortable and unsafe. But as we evolve into like this new era, this new generation of people, and a lot of them are younger folks, they are reaching out for help because they do see how important it is to remain connected to one another and not living in a
Yeah.
state of isolation. And that connectiveness is not only within, whether it has to do with creativity and art, or physical creativity and movement, or music, or being outside and
Mm.
going hiking in nature, but there is a need to want to be able, there's a need and a want to be able to connect with all different facets of yourself and to kind of, dare I say, even shed old generational trauma, old stigma that doesn't belong to you, to move away from that, to become your own person, to not live in the shadow of your parents' trauma, um,
Yes.
on all levels. And one of the best ways to do that is to just normalize connectivity between you and somebody else, between you and your therapist, between you and your loved ones, between you and the natural world. That is where healing happens, is
Mm.
connectivity, not isolation.
So beautifully said. The from that, just as you were kind of going through that, especially the deciding to end trauma, right, and to make the connections, and then and I guess you can end it because you've got this connection, right, a deep connection to the human. So many of my guests on the Jar podcast
Mm-hmm.
have had a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
stories, and what you would assume is generate, and even what they assume or even know from some conversations, generational trauma, right? The way their
Yes.
parents were raised and their parents, right? And where
Yes.
it came from. But I mean, so enlightened, so hopeful for me is they're like, yeah, done. Stop, that it ends with me. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
I know, we now know better. I think these conversations that we are having, the communications we've got, people do know that that the human connection is the way to do it, right? Really understand and showing that love, right? You know, a
Mm-hmm.
little love for each other,
Yeah.
and all that energy turns very positive. And I don't know how people do it, but that recognition to just say, yeah, not with me,
I
and
and-
to be the best they can
yeah,
at
and
being
I think
parents.
what I'm noticing is that when you say I don't know how people do it, I think what people are learning is to drop the shame, and that
Mm,
what's happened to you and happened to your parents and happened to the parent and their parents before
yeah,
them is nothing to be ashamed about. Um, it has to do with just understanding that no, before you came along, nobody was given any information. Again, the tools were missing. So let's just say, let's use the
yeah,
example of reconciling an argument via screaming in a household, right? Uh,
okay.
I'm just saying that I'm Italian. And so um, sometimes Italians tend to
You've
go from 0 to 100. So that may or may not have been an experience that I had in my life, but
it
um,
happens.
right, it happens. So it's not like I'm going to look back and say, okay, it ends here with me, but then look, or rather look forward and say, okay, it ends here with me, and then look back at my family and say, and it's all because of you. I'm going to
No,
say,
no, yeah,
I I recognize that I didn't handle things well up until my point of reckoning, and I'm also recognizing that that was a learned behavior, and that learned
hmm,
behavior came from my parents because that's how they learned to do it, because
yeah,
they learned it from their parents because that's how they learned to do it. So rather than carrying around this real heavy baggage of shame, just let it go and forgive yourself and forgive those you learned from, because they only had a one set of tools available to them too. So if we can
yeah,
learn how to, right, just let go of some of that guilt and shame, just
yeah.
be good to yourself.
And that is, yeah, be good too. I love that comment. And that is really part of that comes part and parcel with that conversation is they always there's that recognition. I think to let it go and to have the forgiveness and really feel good and be just happy with where they are, the content is, yeah, that my parents, that was all they knew. I mean, they
Hmm.
did the best, they did the best they could is
Right.
kind of the usually, right? And we know that means based on what they learned, and what they went through, and they
Hmm.
tried to be better. And so, look, here we are trying to be one generation. If we can get better with each generation,
That's right.
but
Yeah.
somehow it doesn't seem like we're doing that. Somehow it seems like we're messing up on the mental health. I think we're creating other, I think maybe inside the family things are better, but I think maybe in society we're creating other,
Yeah.
other kind of triggers that are giving people some difficulty managing.
Yeah. And if I was to approach that from the mindset of a therapist, the first question I always ask is, if I'm coming from a place of curiosity and not judgment, I
Yeah.
want to
Oh
ask,
yeah.
why is that happening? Because sometimes it's easy for me to fall into judgment. Like I see and hear people do things, and trust me, the first reaction is I have to catch myself, right? But then I say, like, okay, where's that coming from? And what does this
Absolutely.
person need? And immediately the first response is, it's fear. It's fear
Yeah.
of the unknown. It's fear of having something taken away. It's, not being educated on both ends. It's not from one side or the other. It's both, like this lack of
Mm.
education and this fear of um, not understanding what's going to happen next. We just fall back into our shells and defend, rather than getting out there and asking ourselves, okay, like, how can I understand this problem a little bit better, and how can I
Yeah.
contribute to a solution? Yeah.
Lindsay, awesome chat. Um, Very interesting journey. Really
Mm,
interesting journey. And
thanks.
I like what you also, even similar to some guests that I've had on the show, you've taken your journey and turned it into a real, and I like how you're integrating your own personal life into a real passion, putting the two together and trying to do, you're trying to do good in the world. I mean, you really are, right? You're trying to leave this place a little bit better than you found it. I
That's
love it.
right. Yeah, that's what we all.
Saving the
Yeah.
world.
I don't know. I'm getting there. We'll see what happens when it's my time and I have to go back and review the notes. Did it work or didn't it?
Yeah, one soul at a time. Well, one
Yeah.
soul at a time. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that story of the sand dollar guy. I don't know if the sand on the beach.
Oh, I don't know that
Is
one.
yeah, and I won't get it, exactly right, but there is basically the story is like kind of a low tide, and they're walking along, and there's a lot of sand dollars,
Mm.
and they're not the dried up kind, they're the morning kind of, still wet, and somebody's throwing one in, and but the tide's going to go out, and they're going to get burned up, and the person walking with them said, you're not going to say, there's just too many, and he said, well, it mattered to that one, it's
Ah,
kind of.
yeah. Wow.
I think, and it's also who did this better was uh, Rogers, what is his neighbors? Jim Neighbors, Mr. Rogers,
Mr. Rogers. Yes.
Mr. Rogers. Yeah, there's a Charlie Rose interview of this, and it's very similar.
God,
And
I love Mr. Rogers.
it's such a good one. It's basically Charlie Rose asking him, you've had so many people, millions of people see your show, and you've inspired so many kids. And
Yes.
you've been the dad when came home and waiting for dad to come home before dinner.
Yes.
You were a father to so many kids, and your
Including
advice,
me.
right? I mean, like I was pretty touched. And he asked him, what do you think of all that? You so many millions. And he's like, if I helped one boy, one child, one girl to feel better about themselves and to go out and be a better person, it's a miracle. He's like, that's all I need.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a
Well,
humble, what a humble soul, right?
then I relate with Mr. Rogers. Count me in on that philosophy.
Yeah, I'll find it to you. I'll send you that clip.
Yes, please. And hey, before we wrap up, I just wanted to throw
Yeah,
one science nodule out there for anybody that wants to understand the science behind nature-based therapy.
I love it.
So here's the thing. This is my nutshell speech.
Okay.
Humans are a part of nature. It's not an abstract background, right? It's not just resources for us to use, but it is us. We are nature, and it is us, right? So
yes,
us and all of our evolutionary forebears have been deeply connected to nature up as recently as 200 years ago. So we're talking about all of human evolution connected deeply with the natural world, except for just within a blip of an eye. So what we need to understand, right, is when we go outside and we hear the birds chirping, or we feel the breeze on our face, or the sun touching our skin, it actually releases happiness chemicals. There is a bacteria in the soil, and there's research on this, so I'm happy to show you this. This is science, okay? There's bacteria in the soil that when our body comes in contact with it, like on our fingertips, all over our skin, but mostly our fingertips and our toes, it sends a signal to our brain to release serotonin. So truly, being outside in nature does make you happier. It drops your blood pressure. It drops your heart rate. It decreases anxiety. It decreases depression. So even if you can't find a nature-based therapist, right, even if you don't have one in your area, truly, you can lessen your need for medication. You can lessen your need, or lessen your physical issues, like your physical problems with your heart and your lungs. You can increase your happiness. You can increase your sense of calm and your sense of peace just by spending a half an hour to an hour outside in nature every day. That's as simple as going outside in your back porch and talking on the phone with somebody that you love, rather than sitting inside or watching TV, right? And it gets better exponentially the further you go into the woods, right? There is a chemical called phytoncide that trees give off. It's like a pheromone, if you will. And when we breathe that in, our heart rate and our blood pressure decrease, right? It's pure oxygen that we're breathing in if we stand next to a tree. So it's not woo-woo. It's not, hippie. It's not kumbaya. It is real science. There is a reason, right? Why we are better when we are outside. And it's because evolutionarily, that's where we need to be. So
I've seen the studies where you walk barefoot, where you get out of your shoes and put your bare feet, and just see the color spectrum of your energy.
Yes.
And they show the two different, right? Where you're grounded. Yes. It's what you are. You're grounding.
That's
Literally.
what I prescribe to my clients. I don't ask them to go see somebody to prescribe them sertraline or, Depakote or whatever that is. Like, if I can, I'm going to say, go spend 20 minutes one day a week or 2 days a week outside, and then let's come back and talk about your anxiety and depression.
So it's so amazing.
Yeah.
And I love that other one. Beekeepers live longer lives because the bees, the frequency of the wings, the way that they hum,
Yes.
the hum from the beehive actually is at some perfect frequency for the humans, like your energy.
Yes.
And it just releases stress, like,
yep.
Or it aligns your heart. I can't remember what it was. It aligns your brain, your left and right hemisphere, or your internal body. I
don't know all the
just
science
amazing.
behind it, but yeah, like the more
amazing.
research you do, the more amazing it is. And you can't deny, I don't know, for as long as I understand it, you can't deny science, and science is science. Those are the facts. It's good for you. Go outside.
Yeah. We love, go outside. Lindsay, thanks for being a guest. Hang on for 30 seconds. Got one more little outro commercial. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Mental Health Today. Please do throw us some subscribe and a like and share, and give us a little comment on whatever platform you're listening on. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
Yeah, loose, baby.
We're about to go and make this vessel with these great professionals at Public Glass. We're not part of the community, but we're from the outer family of glassblowing. Yeah, we're going to go make a magical giant jar with optic lenses so that if you turn it, it changes all the time. So if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Eye to eye with a man.